The last fracture they made me watch as they put the plasma bolt through my brother's chest. The quantum communicator crackled with electromagnetic interference as the execution beam tore through Rian's ribcage, the superheated plasma cauterizing flesh and bone in microseconds. His body convulsed once, twice, then went limp against the restraints of the Empire's execution platform. The holographic transmission flickered across my laboratory's main display, broadcast simultaneously to all 847 star systems under hegemony control. A warning. A demonstration of power. A knife thrust directly into my soul. Kael, don't let hate consume the galaxy, Rian had whispered moments before the bolt fired, his voice distorted by the 3-sector transmission delay but still unmistakably him. Still carrying that idealistic hope that had defined my younger brother since childhood. Still believing, even as death approached, that there was something in this universe worth saving. I watched his lifeless form crumple to the platform's cold durasteel surface, and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. Not just grief, that would have been bearable. This was the shattering of every moral constraint I had ever accepted, every ethical boundary I had respected. They didn't just kill my brother. They killed my conscience. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rian died trying to steal my own research. Dr. Kael Thorne, quantum physicist and accidental discoverer of reality-ending technology, watching his rebel brother pay the ultimate price for information that could have leveled the playing field between the Empire and the resistance movements scattered across the galaxy. Information that Senator Marcus Voss, my research partner and the man I had trusted above all others, had used as bait in a trap that cost Rian everything. We had been so different, Rian and I. Where I found solace in quantum equations and theoretical frameworks, he threw himself into the messy, dangerous world of actual rebellion. While I calculated probability matrices in sterile laboratories, he smuggled weapons to freedom fighters and rescued political prisoners from Empire detention centers. But our differences had never diminished the bond forged in childhood, when he protected me from bullies who saw my academic obsessions as weakness, while I helped him understand the complex theories that fascinated me but eluded his more practical mind. Explain it like I'm stupid, Kael, he would say with that infectious grin, settling beside me in our father's workshop as I tried to make sense of quantum field dynamics or temporal mechanics. Never stupid, just focused on different things. On justice. On freedom. On protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. My discovery of reality fracture technology had been purely accidental, a byproduct of experiments into quantum field manipulation that I had hoped might lead to new forms of clean energy. Instead, I had stumbled onto something far more dangerous, a method for unraveling the quantum foundations of matter itself. By introducing specific resonance frequencies into subatomic particle interactions, I could cause atoms to literally forget how to maintain coherent existence. Matter would simply stop being matter, dispersing into component energy that followed no recognizable physical laws. The theoretical applications were staggering. The practical implications were terrifying. And now, with Rian's blood cooling on an execution platform 3 sectors away, those implications had become intensely personal. The hegemony empire had controlled most of known space for over 2 centuries, expanding their dominion through a combination of superior technology, ruthless efficiency, and the kind of systematic oppression that crushed hope before it could take root. They ruled through fear, maintaining order by making the cost of rebellion so catastrophically high that most populations simply accepted subjugation as preferable to annihilation. Rian had been part of a growing resistance movement that challenged this calculus, believing that freedom was worth any sacrifice. He had been wrong about that. Some sacrifices were too great to bear. The quantum communicator fell silent as the transmission ended, leaving me alone in my laboratory with the echo of my brother's final words and a choice that would define the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. I could mourn Rian, honor his memory by continuing his work for justice and liberation. Or I could use my accidental discovery to ensure that the Empire paid a price so devastating that their victory would become meaningless. The decision took less time than I care to admit. Building a weaponized version of reality fracture technology required massive amounts of exotic matter and computational power beyond anything I had previously imagined. The quantum resonance frequencies had to be calculated with precision extending to 17 decimal places. The slightest error would either cause the system to fail entirely or create an uncontrolled cascade that could theoretically unmake the entire universe. I worked 18-hour days for months, my laboratory becoming a maze of particle accelerators, quantum processors, and containment fields that hummed with barely controlled energies. Maya Chen, my research assistant and the closest thing I had to a friend after Rian's death, watched my transformation with growing alarm. She was brilliant in her own right, a xenobiology specialist whose insights into alien quantum signatures had proven invaluable to my work. But as the weapon took shape, her questions became increasingly pointed, her concerns more urgent. "Kael, you're talking about collateral damage on a planetary scale," she said one evening, reviewing my targeting calculations with obvious horror. "Even if you limit the fracture radius to military installations, the quantum cascade effects could destabilize entire ecosystems. Billions of innocent people could die." I didn't look up from my work. "The Empire killed billions to maintain their control. I'm simply returning the favor." "That's not justice, Kael. That's genocide." "Justice died with Rian," I replied, my voice flat and emotionless. "What I'm building is something else entirely." Maya tried to reach the man I had been before my brother's execution, but that person was gone, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. I had shut down every emotional connection, every human attachment that might interfere with my work. Love, friendship, empathy, these were luxuries I could no longer afford. They made people vulnerable. They created weaknesses that enemies could exploit. The first test of my weapon came exactly 3 months and 7 days after Rian's death. I had selected an Empire military installation on Kepler 442b, a fortress world that served as a regional command center for 17 sectors. 50,000 Imperial soldiers, officers, and support personnel worked there, along with an unknown number of prisoners in the facility's detention levels. I watched through telescopic feeds as the reality fracture began at the installation's core, spreading outward like invisible fire. The quantum cascade unraveled molecular bonds at the subatomic level, causing matter to simply cease existing in any recognizable form. Buildings, vehicles, people, everything touched by the expanding field of altered spacetime dispersed into component particles that no longer followed conventional physics. The process took 14 minutes and 37 seconds to complete. When it was over, a perfect sphere of empty space marked where the military base had existed, surrounded by a border zone of partially fractured matter that glowed with exotic radiation. 50,000 human beings had been reduced to quantum foam, their atoms scattered across dimensional barriers that might not even exist in our universe anymore. I felt nothing watching them die. No satisfaction, no regret, no sense of justice served. Just a cold, analytical assessment of the weapon's effectiveness and areas for potential improvement. Rian would have been horrified by my reaction, but Rian was dead, and the man who had loved him was dying by degrees with each Empire world I erased from existence. The Imperial response was swift and predictable. Emergency sessions of the High Command, desperate attempts at negotiation, increasingly frantic efforts to locate and neutralize the terrorist responsible for what they termed the Kepler incident. But I had learned to hide in the quantum foam itself, existing in dimensional spaces between conventional reality where their sensors couldn't reach me. I had become something beyond their ability to understand or combat, a ghost in the machine of spacetime itself. Over the following 18 months, I systematically destroyed every major empire stronghold within a 100-parsec radius of their capital worlds. Each attack was more devastating than the last as I refined my technique and expanded the scope of my quantum cascades. The fortress world of Helios Prime, gone, along with its 15 billion inhabitants. The industrial complex at Vega Station, unmade at the molecular level, taking with it the manufacturing capacity that supplied weapons to a dozen sectors. The diplomatic center on New Geneva, erased so completely that even the planet's orbit destabilized, sending its 2 moons spiraling into the system's star. With each successful strike, I felt the last vestiges of my humanity sloughing away like dead skin. I had become a force of nature, implacable and emotionless, bringing death on a scale that defied comprehension. Entire civilizations that had existed for millennia simply vanished from the galaxy, their histories, cultures, and achievements reduced to scattered subatomic particles floating in empty space. The Empire's propaganda machine worked overtime trying to maintain morale as their most secure installations fell to an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't fight. But even their most effective lies couldn't hide the truth from their own forces. Something was systematically unmaking the foundations of their power, and they had no idea how to stop it. Maya's betrayal came during my preparation for the next phase of operations. I discovered her secret communications with Imperial intelligence through a routine security scan, her desperate attempts to provide them with information that might help locate and stop me. She had been feeding them data about my psychological state, my research methods, even the theoretical limitations of my technology. All in a misguided attempt to end what she correctly identified as genocide on an unprecedented scale. When I confronted her in Laboratory 7, she didn't deny her actions or attempt to justify them through appeals to my former humanity. "You've become something worse than them, Kael," she said simply, her dark eyes reflecting the quantum field generators that surrounded us. "Rian died fighting to save lives, to build something better. You're destroying everything he believed in." "Rian's beliefs got him killed," I replied, activating the reality fracture emitters with a thought transmitted through my neural interface. "Mine will get me results." Maya's face contorted in shock and betrayal as the quantum cascade engulfed her, unmaking her brilliant mind and passionate heart atom by atom. Her last words were lost in the dissolution of her vocal cords, but I could read the question in her eyes: "What have you become?" With Maya's death, I completed my transformation into the monster the galaxy needed me to be. No more moral advisors, no more voices of conscience, no more reminders of the man I had been before my brother's execution. I was ready for the final phase of my revenge. The ultimate weapon took 2 more years to construct, a device capable of fracturing the galactic core itself. The theory was elegantly simple: introduce reality-disrupting resonances into the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's center, causing a quantum cascade that would spread outward at light speed, unmaking everything in its path. The execution required computational resources that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible, exotic matter configurations that existed only in theoretical frameworks, and energy inputs that dwarfed the total output of most stellar civilizations. But I had learned to think beyond conventional limitations. I had become something that existed partially outside normal spacetime, drawing power from dimensions that might be fictional and manipulating forces that violated causality itself. The weapon was built not just with technology, but with hate refined into a form of physics all its own. As I prepared to activate the galactic fracture device, Rian's voice seemed to whisper through my memory one final time: "Don't let hate consume the galaxy." But it was too late for warnings, too late for redemption. The hate hadn't consumed the galaxy yet, but it had consumed me so completely that the distinction no longer mattered. I triggered the device. The galactic core began to unravel from the inside out, its supermassive black hole losing coherence as quantum fields collapsed into configurations that shouldn't exist in our universe. The cascade spread slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as it encountered stellar mass and converted it into more exotic energy to fuel the expansion. Stars winked out of existence one by one, their fusion fires extinguished as the atoms that fed them forgot how to maintain nuclear reactions. I watched through sensor networks spread across thousands of light-years as civilizations older than Earth's solar system simply vanished. The crystal cities of the Andromedans, built over millions of years from living silicon that sang in harmonies beyond human hearing. The gas giant habitats of the helium dancers, entire cultures that existed in the upper atmospheres of worlds where solid matter was a curiosity. The machine intelligences of the Ferris Collective, synthetic beings who had transcended biological existence only to be reduced to random electrons by my quantum cascade. All of them gone. All of them innocent of any crime except existing in the same galaxy as the empire that killed my brother. The process would take approximately 1,000 years to complete, spreading outward from the galactic core at the maximum speed allowed by relativistic physics. Plenty of time for me to observe the results of my work, to catalog every extinction, every cultural death, every unique perspective on existence that my revenge had eliminated from the universe. As the months passed and the death toll climbed beyond any number that had meaning, my psychological defenses finally crumbled under the weight of what I had done. I began talking to hallucinations of Rian and Maya, carrying on conversations with phantoms conjured by guilt and madness. They spoke to me in voices I remembered too well, asking questions I couldn't answer, making accusations I couldn't deny. "Why did you do this?" Rian's ghost asked me one evening as I watched the vegan system collapse into quantum foam. "To avenge you," I replied, my voice hoarse from disuse. "By destroying everything I died to protect." I had no answer for that. How could I explain that revenge had become more important than justice, that destruction had felt more satisfying than creation, that the pain of loss had transformed into a need to ensure that everyone else experienced the same emptiness that defined my existence? The reality fracture continued its inexorable expansion, and I began to understand the true magnitude of my actions. This wasn't justice or even revenge, this was the tantrum of a broken man who had been given the power of gods without the wisdom to use it responsibly. I had become the kind of monster that civilized beings told stories about to frighten their children, the ultimate cautionary tale about the dangers of uncontrolled grief and unlimited power. When I tried to reverse the process, I discovered what should have been obvious from the beginning: the quantum cascade had gained its own momentum, feeding on the exotic matter produced by each successful reality fracture. It was beyond my control now, beyond anyone's control, a runaway reaction that would continue until it had consumed every atom in the galaxy. I avenged my brother by destroying everything he died to protect, I whispered to the empty laboratory that had become my prison. In my final days, as sensors detected the approaching edge of the cascade that would eventually unmake my hidden sanctuary, I began recording a holographic testimony for whatever archaeologists might someday investigate the remains of our extinct galaxy. I told them about Rian and his dream of freedom, about the love that had bound us together and the hate that had driven us apart. I explained the science behind reality fracture technology, the theoretical frameworks that had made galactic genocide possible, the terrible mathematics of grief multiplied by infinite power. Most importantly, I confessed. Not to any crime recognized by galactic law, those legal frameworks had ceased to exist along with the civilizations that created them. But to the deeper crime of choosing destruction over healing, revenge over redemption, the easy path of hate over the harder path of hope that Rian had walked until the very end. But fate had one final revelation waiting for me, one last twist in a story already warped beyond recognition by my choices. In my last comprehensive scan of the dying galaxy, searching for some sign that my work was finally nearing completion, I discovered something that shouldn't have existed: escape pods. Thousands of them, scattered across the expanding wavefront of destruction, fleeing toward the Andromeda galaxy with the last survivors of every world I had destroyed. Somehow, some fragment of each civilization had escaped my genocide, rescue missions, evacuation fleets, generation ships launched in desperate hope of finding sanctuary beyond my reach. The Andromedans' crystal song ships, carrying genetic templates and cultural matrices that could rebuild their civilization among alien stars. Helium dancer atmospheric processors, designed to terraform gas giants in distant galaxies. Even uploaded consciousness banks from the Ferris Collective, carrying the souls of synthetic beings toward whatever digital afterlife awaited them in Andromeda. They were fleeing the monument to my grief, carrying with them the seeds of everything I had tried to destroy. Life, hope, the possibility that somewhere beyond the reach of my hate, something better might grow from the ashes of the galaxy I had murdered. With the last dregs of my power, I erected quantum barriers around their trajectory, protecting the fleeing survivors from the cosmic debris and exotic radiation produced by my reality cascade. It was a meaningless gesture, nothing could atone for the trillions I had killed, the cultures I had obliterated, the futures I had stolen from beings who had never heard Rian's name or known of his existence. But perhaps those survivors would find new homes among the stars of Andromeda, and perhaps they would build something better than what I had destroyed. The reality fracture reached my sanctuary on a Tuesday, though the concept of weekdays had become meaningless in a galaxy where most of the worlds that had defined such measurements no longer existed. I felt the quantum cascade beginning to dissolve the exotic matter that comprised my laboratory's hull, the dimensional anchors that had kept me hidden between the folds of space-time finally losing coherence. As my body began to disperse into component particles, I spoke my final words to the vast emptiness that had once been a galaxy teeming with life. They killed my brother. So I killed everything. Including myself. The quantum field collapsed around me, and Dr. Kael Thorne, destroyer of galaxies and mourner of the dead, ceased to exist in any form recognizable to the universe he had broken. His atoms joined the expanding cloud of exotic matter that marked the death of the Milky Way, contributing their infinitesimal mass to a process that would continue for another 9 centuries before reaching its inevitable conclusion. Behind him, the galaxy continued its thousand-year death spiral, a monument to the terrible mathematics of love transformed into hate, of brilliant minds twisted by grief into instruments of apocalypse. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, a small convoy of survivors carried the fading light of extinct civilizations toward an uncertain but possible future, protected by the final act of the man who had destroyed everything else they had ever known. In the end, love had indeed conquered all, by becoming so twisted and tormented that it chose to destroy everything it couldn't save, leaving only the faintest hope that somewhere, somehow, life might find a way to begin again. The last quantum emitter fell silent, and the galaxy that had given birth to countless wonders became nothing more than an expanding sphere of exotic radiation, marking the grave of the most beautiful revenge ever conceived by a broken heart.